The rumble of diesel engines rolled down my street at 7 o'clock. A tow truck wasn't anything unusual for our coastal neighborhood. What was unusual, though, was seeing two massive tow trucks creeping straight into my driveway, their operators already unloading chains, hooks, and wheel lifts like they were gearing up for a battlefield extraction. I set my coffee on the porch rail, adjusted the sweatshirt that read Coast Guard veteran, and stepped outside to find three men circling my covered patrol vessel like scavengers sizing up fresh prey. "Morning, gentlemen," I said, keeping my voice calm even as irritation tightened in my chest. "Mind telling me why you're on my property?" The lead driver, a heavy-set guy whose coveralls looked permanently stained with engine grease, didn't even give me a proper glance. "Got orders from the HOA to remove this abandoned boat," he said flatly. "Paperwork says it's been sitting here more than 30 days without movement." I almost laughed out loud. Abandoned? The vessel sitting under that custom marine cover was a 28-foot Coast Guard response boat assigned to me for routine maintenance and inspection. It had been in my driveway exactly 12 days, and every inch of it was federally owned equipment. "I suggest you stop what you're doing and leave immediately," I told them, pulling out my phone. "That boat belongs to the United States Coast Guard, and I've got the documentation to prove it." The driver shrugged like it was just another Tuesday. "Not my problem. HOA president says it goes. It goes. You want to argue? Take it up with her." That was the moment I hit record and dialed a number I hoped I'd never need to use in this neighborhood. Within minutes, three black SUVs with government plates came tearing around the corner like a storm front, and suddenly those tow truck drivers didn't look nearly as confident. "My name is Arthur Mitchell, and I've served in the Coast Guard for 15 years. 6 months ago, I moved into this quiet community in Cedar Ridge Estates, drawn by the water access and the promise of a peaceful residential area. What I hadn't realized was that 3 months before I arrived, the neighborhood had elected a new HOA president named Brenda Kensington, a woman who apparently believed her position was a divine mandate to micromanage every driveway, lawn, and mailbox within a 5-block radius. The trouble started the moment I brought the patrol boat home. As part of my duties overseeing fleet maintenance for the district, I occasionally needed to store vessels at authorized locations for inspections or minor repairs. My property had been vetted and approved by the Coast Guard, complete with security standards and federal permission. I even went the extra mile, introducing myself to the neighbors, explaining why the vessel would be there, and assuring everyone it was temporary. Most people were fascinated. The Hendersons next door brought their grandkids over to admire it. Old Mr. Sterling, a Navy vet himself, saluted it on his morning walk. But Brenda saw it as an insult to her perfectly curated suburban kingdom, an eyesore, a violation, and worst of all, something she hadn't personally approved. The first notice appeared on my door 3 days after the boat arrived, written in Comic Sans and laminated for reasons still unknown to mankind. It claimed my vessel violated HOA bylaws on recreational vehicles, watercraft, and commercial equipment. I responded politely, sending her copies of my federal authorization and explaining that the vessel was government property, not a recreational boat, and that federal law superseded HOA regulations. Her reply came the next day via certified mail. She dismissed my so-called federal papers, insisting HOA rules were supreme within the community. It was painfully obvious she'd never heard of the supremacy clause of the Constitution, but I tried to stay diplomatic. I invited her to inspect the vessel in person, see the Coast Guard markings, and review the documentation. She showed up that evening with 2 board members, a clipboard, and the most smug expression I've ever seen on a human being. She was exactly what you'd expect, middle-aged, wearing an asymmetrical haircut that probably cost more than my monthly marine maintenance budget, and dressed in an outfit that practically shouted, "I demand to speak to your manager," from across the neighborhood. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, forcing my name out like it pained her to even say it. "I don't care if this boat belongs to the Queen of England. It's an eyesore. It's dragging down property values. It needs to be removed." I calmly walked her around the vessel, pointing out the Coast Guard insignia, the federal property markings, and the official registration numbers. I showed her the maintenance records, the required security measures, and even a letter from my commanding officer authorizing temporary storage. She snapped photos of everything, but not to understand. She was clearly trying to build what she thought was an airtight case. "This is obviously a commercial vehicle," she declared, completely ignoring the huge U.S. Coast Guard lettering on the hull. And that tarp, she added with a scoff, isn't even in an HOA-approved color. It needs to be navy blue or forest green, not gray. It's a military weather cover, I said evenly. It's designed to protect sensitive equipment. Then it belongs on a military base, not in our quiet neighborhood, she snapped back. You have 7 days to remove it, or you'll be fined $50 per day, ma'am. With respect, I answered calmly. You can't fine me for storing federally owned equipment I'm legally authorized to maintain. This isn't my boat. It belongs to your country, the same Coast Guard vessel that protects these waters and answers emergencies. She let out a sharp scoff. It protects this neighborhood, Mr. Mitchell, not your little boat club. 7 days. After she left, I contacted our legal affairs office right away. They confirmed I was completely within my rights and even offered to issue an official clarification letter. I assumed that would settle it, but I badly underestimated Brenda Kensington's stubborn streak and lack of judgment. The fine started exactly 7 days later, $50 every day, right on cue. Then she escalated. Suddenly, I was violating noise rules even though the boat hadn't made a sound. My driveway was allegedly exceeding limits for recreational vehicles, despite this not being one. She even argued the height of the cover violated airspace rules, something she clearly made up on the spot. By the end of the second week, she claimed I owed over $2,000 in HOA penalties. She sent notices to every resident trying to turn the neighborhood against me and posted images online with captions like, "Is this the neighborhood we want?" and "Commercial vehicles ruin property values." Most people weren't convinced. A few neighbors even offered to speak for me at the next HOA meeting. But Brenda had already packed the board with allies and controlled every meeting like a dictator at a podium. She called a special session just to handle what she dramatically called the boat issue. I arrived that night with a full folder of documents and a Coast Guard legal officer who had driven in specifically for this growing mess. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Lawson was calm, professional, and entirely unimpressed. The officer in charge had dealt with civilian interference cases many times before, and when the public comment period opened, she rose from her seat, adjusted her uniform, and spoke with a calm authority that filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her tone carrying the seriousness of federal law. "Petty Officer Mitchell is currently performing authorized maintenance on a United States Coast Guard vessel. This situation is not a matter of HOA preference or neighborhood policy. Any attempt to interfere with him or the vessel could be considered a federal offense. I strongly recommend that all fines be immediately rescinded and that any further harassment cease without delay." Brenda's expression shifted instantly, her face flushing into a deep, furious color as if disbelief and anger were fighting for control. She tried to regain authority, insisting this was a private community issue, but the officer remained steady and unmoved. "Ma'am," she replied evenly, "I am speaking with the full backing of federal authority. HOA regulations do not override United States law, and if this continues, you will find out exactly how far that authority extends." The room erupted into shouting, with some residents backing Brenda's claims about community rules while others warned about the legal consequences, but she refused to listen, shutting down objections with procedural language and threats of fines for disruption. Eventually, she pushed through a resolution labeling the vessel a nuisance and authorizing its removal by any means necessary. When I stood to object, she only smiled and told me I would understand soon enough that HOA rules came first. That Thursday night marked the turning point. By the following Tuesday morning, after returning from base inspections, I found my driveway completely empty, my boat, cover and all, gone without a trace. Only the wheel chocks remained, thrown carelessly into the grass. My security cameras had been deliberately sprayed over, but a neighbor's system caught everything clearly. The footage showed Brenda herself standing in the street at 6 a.m., directing tow trucks as they hauled it away. A desk, still smiling, still unaware of what was unfolding. Clipboard in hand, she looked almost proud, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. On her phone were photos of the vessel being hauled away, likely intended for some self-congratulatory post later. What she failed to realize was that she had just triggered a federal response. The report had already been escalated beyond local authorities straight to the Coast Guard Investigative Unit. Once I explained that a private individual had taken a government vessel equipped with restricted navigation and emergency response systems, everything moved quickly. Within 60 minutes, the base commander was looped in. By the second hour, federal agents were already coordinating a response. The vessel was traced to a commercial towing yard about 15 miles out, left sitting in a rear lot with a handwritten tag instructing the HOA to handle storage. The yard operator, immediately sensing the seriousness of the situation when agents arrived, fully cooperated and provided every document he had, including a signed work order from Brenda Kensington and payment processed through an HOA credit card. While one team secured the vessel and began inspection for any tampering or damage, another unit went directly to the HOA office. That's where they found Brenda still seated at her desk, smiling as if nothing in the world had changed. Her desk was still neatly arranged, surrounded by what she clearly believed were victory photos of the boat being hauled away. That confidence disappeared the moment agents in tactical gear walked in holding federal warrants. "Brenda Kensington?" the lead agent asked. She gave a small nod, suddenly unable to speak. "You are under investigation for theft of government property, interference with federal operations, and misuse of HOA funds. You have the right to remain silent." She tried to recover her tone. "This is absurd. I was enforcing community standards. That boat was abandoned." The agent calmly responded, placing documents on the desk. "We have your federal notices, warnings from Coast Guard Legal Affairs, and video evidence of you directing the removal of a vessel containing classified equipment. I strongly suggest you stop talking and contact a lawyer." The investigation moved quickly and harshly. Subpoenaed HOA financial records showed she had diverted nearly $8,000 in community funds for the illegal removal, money originally designated for landscaping. She had also been issuing fines without board approval, keeping portions for herself, and threatening residents who questioned her authority. But the situation escalated further. Federal technicians inspecting the boat found that the towing process had damaged sensitive components, including encrypted communication modules and navigation systems. What started as theft now involved destruction of government property and potential compromise of classified equipment. The base commander was furious, and the U.S. Attorney's Office immediately took interest. An emergency HOA meeting was called that night, this time without Brenda, who was reportedly trying to make bail. The remaining board members were in panic, quickly distancing themselves from her actions. They voted unanimously to cancel all fines against me, issue a formal apology, and fully cooperate with federal investigators. Several resigned immediately, refusing any connection to the fallout. Others admitted Brenda had pressured them into compliance, but they had been too afraid to oppose her. Online, the community page erupted with residents sharing similar stories of her intimidation and abuse of power. Meanwhile, I worked with federal agents documenting every detail of the boat's damage. Scratches, broken seals, and loosened fittings were all recorded. Repairs alone were estimated at over $40,000, not including replacement of compromised classified systems. Brenda's arraignment drew attention. She entered court still insisting the HOA had authority to remove anything she labeled a nuisance. The federal magistrate, a former Navy officer, showed no patience. She faced charges including theft of government property, destruction of federal assets, interference with military operations, misuse of fiduciary funds, and additional counts that visibly unsettled her attorney. The Coast Guard released a statement thanking me for cooperation and warning against interference with military property. Local media quickly picked up the story, and Brenda became known as an example of HOA overreach gone wrong. Her real estate business, previously unknown to many, began losing clients rapidly. The trial was set for 6 months later, but the evidence was overwhelming. Photos and videos showed her directing the removal, financial records traced every transaction, and multiple witnesses described her threats and behavior. She eventually accepted a plea deal, 18 months in federal prison, $30,000 restitution, and 5 years probation banning her from any HOA position. When the sentence was read, she fainted in court. Officers helped her into a chair as she repeated that she was only protecting the neighborhood and believed HOA rules came first. The judge ended it simply, making it clear she had learned the hard way that there is a hierarchy of law in this country, and an HOA is not at the top.